These stories are first-hand accounts shared by Reddit users, detailing unsettling real-life encounters that left lasting impressions. Each narrative provides a chilling glimpse into moments of danger, survival, and eerie coincidences that might make you rethink your surroundings. Disclaimer: these accounts were originally published by Reddit users and are presented as personal experiences. While they are described as true events, their accuracy relies on the original storytellers. The details shared here are intended for awareness and cautionary purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised. Story 1. I was hunted in Target for over an hour. This is my first post, and although this happened back in December 2019, I still think about it on a daily basis because it was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. I hope it offers some sort of enlightenment on what to do/not to do if you find yourself in a similar situation. Back in early December, I had ventured out to do a bit of late-night shopping. I'm a 31-year-old stay-at-home mother of 2 young children, so once my husband gets home from work, I like to take some time to myself and go shopping, take a drive, or run errands, kid-free. It was around 8:30 p.m. when I arrived at the Target I frequent. I'm by no means a paranoid or anxious individual, but I have attended several seminars in college on human trafficking and have done plenty of research on my own learning to identify red flags and what precautions to take when out in public alone, especially at night. I carry several self-defense items on my person at all times: Cubiton, alarm, and universal handcuff key, just in case. I parked directly in front of the store, next to a cart caddy, and took a mental note of the vehicles parked nearby again, just as precautions. I was taught at an early age to always be observant of your surroundings, and being a control freak just naturally makes you that way. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary that night, and the parking lot was actually quite empty, most likely because it was a weekday. As I entered the store, I began browsing like usual, following the natural flow of the store departments, following the main aisle around. I had been browsing for only 10 to 15 minutes when I noticed a young gentleman, mid-20s. He was tall, skinny, dressed in a dirty gray 2-piece sweatsuit and brown work boots. He looked over at me, I smiled and said hello, but his facial expression was blank. He looked like he may have been high on something by the look in his eyes, but he didn't seem to care for my gesture and he quickly moved on. At first glance, there was nothing in particular that alarmed me about him, except I took notice of the fact he was just wandering down the main aisle with no cart or basket, hands in his pockets, and didn't seem to be with anyone. I continued shopping with no second thoughts, and made my way to the next department. Several minutes had passed, and that's when I noticed a second young gentleman, wearing the same gray sweatsuit and similar pair of work boots. Again, no cart, no basket. He glanced at me, then quickly darted his eyes away when he realized I was looking directly at him. I became a bit more alerted, but still remained composed and continued on browsing. Another 15 minutes or so passed, and that's when a third older man caught my attention, and you guessed it, the same gray sweatsuit and work boots with no cart, no basket, just his hands in his pockets. I assumed they were in some sort of work uniform, maybe construction workers, but why weren't they walking around together, and why didn't they have any items to purchase? At this point it was difficult to focus on browsing. I had a bad feeling about these 3 men, and it became clear that something was a bit off. Over the next 20 minutes or so, I felt as if I was being monitored by the 3 of them, as if they were all communicating my whereabouts as I continued to make my way through the store. Because each department I entered, it didn't take long for me to notice one of the 3 men pass by whatever side aisle I happened to be in, making their presence known to me. I stayed completely vigilant while trying not to panic or allow my suspicions to overwhelm me. Something about their presence felt very heavy and dark, so I decided to test their intentions, to prove I wasn't overthinking the situation and my bad gut feeling was valid. I began picking random aisles and traveling back and forth between departments in a very unorganized and random fashion, to see if the men would continue to pass by me as frequently as they had been. With every aisle I popped into, it was just a few minutes later one of them would make an appearance, staring me down as they passed by. It felt as if I was being surrounded like a wild animal, hunted even. They were no longer trying to be conspicuous, which was the scariest part of it all, and everything instinctual was screaming at me to get out of there. I gripped my cart so tightly and figured if I got too close I could use the cart to push them away, or at least create distance between us. By this point I had been shopping for about an hour altogether, maybe a bit over, and was ready to purchase my items, but honestly I felt too uncomfortable to continue browsing even if I wanted to. The men had been following me all that time, and I was becoming more annoyed if anything. The store was pretty empty around this time, one of the main reasons I like shopping at night, but that made this particular situation even more unsettling. Two preteen girls were wandering around by themselves, which quickly caught my attention because the men had bypassed them making similar advances, but the girls were seemingly oblivious, so I quietly got their attention and asked them to go find their parents and stay with them, trying not to freak them out. The mother in me was in full-on protection mode. I couldn't imagine having my young children with me on this night. Thank God they were home safe and sound. As I made my way to the checkout, I noticed one of the men coming up from behind me, walking at a quicker pace this time, so I immediately stopped and turned to lock eyes with him as he approached. I will never forget the darkness in his eyes. An eerie smirk formed on his face as he nudged my shoulder, continuing to stare me down, walking backwards to hold his sinister gaze as he exited out the store. I had lost sight of the other two men, and I hated the uncertainty of it all. He made his message clear at that very moment. My stomach dropped and my entire body began to shake. It was a feeling I hadn't felt since I was a kid getting lost in the supermarket, a feeling of desperation. I quickly walked to the checkout, discreetly asked the cashier if I could speak to a manager, and told them what had transpired over the last hour, politely asking for a male employee to walk me to my car and for them to alert their security team member. When I told the manager what happened, her face sank as if she had already known about these men, and once I described them she confirmed she knew who I was talking about. She expressed that several of the female employees had found the men unsettling in the past, and reassured me that someone would escort me to my car. She made a report about the incident and said she would alert the authorities. I was still shaking but felt relieved that she believed me and showed concern for the other young female patrons in the store. She took my information, then a young male employee walked me out to my car. What I saw as I exited the store made me so sick to my stomach, solidifying all of my suspicions. A white windowless van was parked in the lot directly behind my car, about a 3 parking space distance between us, one of the men seated in the driver's seat and the other two leaning against the side of the van facing my car, attempting to hide out of view. I mean, how cliché and obvious can you be? Your license plate might as well read, Lady Snatchers, at that point. Whatever their intent, it didn't seem pure. I pointed them out to the male employee and said, "There they are," which then prompted the men to scurry into the van and speed out of the parking lot without hesitation. I truly don't know what would have happened if I walked out to my car alone, and I'm so freaking grateful I made it home safe and sound and lived to tell my story. Over the following week I had heard there were several abduction attempts in the shopping center parallel to that target, and I'm almost certain it was the same individuals. To the 3 matching sweatsuit creeps, let's not ever meet again. Story 2. I don't know if I would have made it out of the woods if I had done what he wanted me to do. Hello. I just came across this subreddit and gosh, some of these are terrifying. I do have a story of something that happened to me from a long while ago, but in hindsight it was really dumb of me and I feel terribly dumb now, so I've always been hesitant to tell a lot of people I know about it, except for my psychiatrist L. And I always apologize for long posts, so it's so hard not to hear. There were some other conversations I had with this man named John. It was mostly him talking, but I left some of them out for length's sake. This was a few years ago. It was pretty late, past 1:30 or 2 a.m. I was living with this boy who was pretty abusive, and he had gotten really jealous at this party we were at earlier that night. Not even an hour after we had gotten home, he tossed me out onto our front porch and locked the door behind me. I was knocking and pleading for him to please let me back inside. I was still wearing what I had worn to the party and it was freezing out. I wasn't sure what to do. He had my phone, purse, and wallet in the house with him, so I just sat on the porch crying. When he turned off the lights both inside and outside of the house, I knew he wasn't going to let me back in. I felt so helpless and cold. I thought about knocking on a neighbor's door, though he didn't have many, but I had anxiety about waking any of them up and causing trouble for my boyfriend. So instead I decided I would try to walk to this gas station and motel, which was like a little less than a mile away, so I could use their phone to try to call a girlfriend of mine to see if I could sleep over with her. Ironically enough, the road I was walking on Donner Pass Road, so the freezing cold was fitting, but anyway, a little bit into the walk this tall white pickup truck was approaching on the opposite side of the road that I was on. I tried not to make eye contact for obvious reasons, but then I heard the truck stopping and beginning to make a U-turn and my heart just started pounding. I just about froze up but forced myself to speed walk at the very least. The truck pulled up to me and this guy rolled down his window and asked what I was doing out this late. I told him how I was going to meet my friend at the gas station and that she was expecting me. He sort of smiled and offered me a ride. I said no thank you, saying that I shouldn't hitchhike. He told me, "Well, good. I don't pick up hitchhikers, or anyone. You don't look like a hitchhiker though, you just look like you need some help." He just kept driving next to me and told me I shouldn't think he was a creep, and he pulled out what looked like a police badge and told me he had just gotten off duty, which is why he was in civilian clothes and out so late. He said he wouldn't mind driving next to me just to make sure I got to where I was heading safely. I was naive and a bit too trusting of his kindness and credentials, and when he offered me a ride again I said that it would be nice because the gas station wasn't that far away anyway. He popped the door open for me and I hopped in. The radio was low, it was a little messy, the ashtray was full of cigarettes, there were a lot of newspapers on the passenger floor. As I was moving my feet some of the papers shifted, showing a pair of handcuffs, some coffee cups, empty water bottles, rags, a highlight-colored bandana, and some other things. He apologized saying that it was the truck he took hunting, but it was super warm so I was happy and didn't mind at all. He told me his name was John. He asked why I was scantily dressed without a jacket and I started to tell him about the party and the fight I had been in with my boyfriend. He was super charming and attentive. He even laughed that he could go back and arrest him. I asked about him and he told me about his family. He was a young dad, he had a wife, a daughter, a son and a dog, and I told him it was like he had the perfect little family and he laughed and said he certainly did. Then it sort of clicked for me to ask him if I could use his phone, but he said no because he had to save his battery. We were approaching the gas station and he drove right past it. I politely said, "Oh, I think that's the one." But he didn't answer me. I felt sick to my stomach. My heart started pounding, I started getting choked up, my eyes started tearing up as I was looking out the windows and watching the lights behind us getting further and further away. It was hard for me to even speak, but somehow I murmured, asking if he could please turn around, and he ignored me. Whenever I would look at him, he just looked empty-eyed and emotionless, totally dead and glazed. I looked back out the window and down at the road to see if maybe we were going slow enough that I could make a leap out of the car without seriously injuring myself. I remember always hearing, "Never go to the second location," but I thought about the possibility of jumping out and breaking an ankle and how it would be a lot harder to get away with one foot as opposed to two, debating with myself that there was snow on the ground, but then again, snow is hard to get along in, especially when you're not fully clothed. I feel so dumb now too because I wasn't even tied up or anything. I was just so scared though. Like there was nothing but trees, an empty road, and us. I was crying pretty badly at this point and asked if I could please borrow his phone again. I don't know why I even asked, and he told me to stop talking. Then he started talking underneath his breath saying, "Girls shouldn't be out so late. You shouldn't have been alone this late. Look what you're doing to me. Dressed like a slut." And other derogatory things. As he kept saying these terrible things, too many to type out here, I wasn't even responding, I was just crying and trying to think past the fear I was feeling. I remembered the pair of handcuffs I remember seeing under the papers beneath my feet, so I used that little, I don't know how to describe it, like, scoopy motion. I managed to use my feet to scoop the handcuffs up and use my heels and toes to push them under the bottom of my seat, as far as I could. I was thinking of different things I could do to try to help myself, like if we were close enough to some upcoming lights or structures, if I ever made it to them, I could just grab the wheel and cause us to crash into them, or maybe how if I got lucky enough for a cop to pass us, I could grab the wheel and swerve so he would appear to be a drunk driver and we'd get pulled over. I guiltily thought about the possibility if this man is just having a weird night and how if I did anything it would hurt him, but I told myself that sort of thinking sort of got me into this mess. He pulled off road where there were still woods on both sides of us. On his side the wooded trees were closer to the road, on mine, there was a small gap fully covered in thick, I don't know how many feet of snow, before the trees thickly picked up maybe 10 to 16 yards away. He turned off the car and coldly said there was something wrong with the car and to get out with him. As he grabbed the keys and was stepping out of the car, I grabbed onto the center console and cried and pleaded not to make me get out with him because it was too cold. He turned around to face me, his door still open, and shouted at me to get out of the car because we had to go check out the trunk bed hatch. I dug my fingernails deeper into the console, thinking my cries of "no" and head shaking would cause him to come around to my side of the car and drag me out himself. I was crying and said, "Please, John, I'm so cold and scared." I was thinking of everything I ever heard: humanize yourself, use first names. He stared at me in this way. I can't even describe it to this day. I don't even know how to start. He got back in the car and I slinked towards my window, scared he would drag me over the console. He turned off the headlights and everything just looked dark blue. He stared at the steering wheel for what felt like years before lighting a cigarette and looking out his window and back at me and then back out his window. He heard me shuffle my feet on the newspapers. I was just adjusting my legs, but while still staring out his window told me if I thought about running, he had a quick way to get me where he wanted me. And oddly enough, I was sort of thinking of running minutes before that, but reasoned that if he wanted me out of the car then I should definitely stay in, otherwise he would chase me or shoot me, in case he had hunting rifles in the back. I didn't dare look. I'm glad I was right. I think at that point I sort of hit some sort of bottom of my reserve, and instead of panic, there was numbness and exhaustion. There were still an occasional hot terror too, but I just remember being numb. I talked to a psychiatrist about this sort of thing, and he thinks it just came from my ex-boyfriends giving me PTSD. It was dead quiet, but I finally just barely audibly told him that my friend was still waiting for me and asked about his wife and children, and he flatly said he didn't have a wife or children and that his house was empty. I asked him what he was thinking about and he said, "I'm thinking of what to do with you." He didn't say it angrily, he just said it flatly and coldly, which sort of scared me more. I did start getting worked back up to a cry at that point, and he told me not to cry and turned the car on, offering me some heat. I just cried and said I wanted to go home. Eventually, he started driving, and kept driving until we were approaching a gas station. I was gauging the right time to reach for the wheel, but before I could, he started slowing down. While pulling up, he told me not to tell anyone or he would find me. Then he told me all he was doing was teaching me a lesson not to hitchhike with strangers. He was almost coming to a complete stop when he told me to get out before he changed his mind. Before he could even get another look at me to assess my understanding, I was already down out of the truck and sprinting towards the gas station. The panic was overwhelming me, but then I stopped and remembered to try to see his license plate. I turned around but only caught the blur of the last 3 numbers as he was driving off. I ran inside and asked the clerk behind the counter to please call the police. I waited until the officer got there, and I'll be honest, I was a little scared it would be John. My fears melted away when the new-faced policeman got there. I gave him the description of John, his appearance, the vehicle color and type, the parts of the license plate number I had caught, the fact he said he was an off-duty cop, just basically anything I could. I asked him if he could look at the camera, and the officer disappeared in the back for a little bit, then came back out saying there was nothing on them. I asked if I would be able to look, and the officer said no and asked me if I didn't trust him, and I told him of course I did. The officer gave me a ride to my friends lecturing me for hitchhiking, consisting of him repeatedly asking if I knew who Ted Bundy was. Of course I knew. I was just naive to think it could never happen to me, and I was desperate for some warmth. I never heard anything back about the report that was made, so I would try to follow up, and each time I did, they never got back to me aside from this one time I was told my case number didn't exist, but that didn't stop me from trying to follow up. Throughout the months and years I asked my friend, whose home I slept over at that one night, if she ever heard of any weirdness or anything since that incident had happened to her or anyone up there, and she always says no. So I sort of let it go and try to tell myself that maybe he actually was just trying to teach me a lesson or something. I mean, I definitely never hitchhiked again, so if it was a lesson, it certainly worked. I never heard anything back having to do with the case. I never heard of any other odd experiences up there. Maybe it was just one man trying to teach me something. But honestly, sometimes I think I tell myself all of that to help me sleep better at night. It all felt really real. Even if it wasn't real, I'm really glad I didn't get out of the car in the woods that night. This has also been super therapeutic to let out, so thank you so much for letting me to post here to edit. I'm not really the biggest fan of a few of you trying to inbox me saying you're John, so if you could maybe not, that would be super neat, thank you. Story 3. He will be out soon. A few years ago, I was working at a pizza chain in my hometown as a driver. I was 27, but made darn good money delivering. I had worked at a few other places, both local and chain, in the years before, and still work as a dasher on occasion even after this happened. Now I choose to deliver in much safer areas for this reason. I got luckier than I could ever imagine. One night I was working and had two deliveries to take. Both were cash orders. I had $12 left in my bank, what drivers are given to use as change for cash orders so you don't have a ton of cash on you at all times. The first order went smoothly. The guy gave me $50 for a $35 order, so I was excited about the nice tip. I drove to the second delivery. It was at an apartment complex with multiple buildings. I had delivered there before. The sun was about to set, but it was still very light out. The chain I worked at had us drive company cars with the logo on it, all white sedans. This is important. I grabbed the order and go to the door to the apartment building. A young guy came out, and a much bigger older guy was outside smoking a cigarette. The big guy went inside as the smaller guy came out. He looked around nervously and asked how much he owed me. The way he was looking around just made me very nervous. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I told him the amount and he said that wasn't what he was told on the phone. Something was very wrong. I felt someone else walk out behind me from the door, as the first young guy looked around down the parking lot, craning his neck as if he was looking for someone. I told him the amount again and broke down the order for him, trying to keep calm. Then the first guy held a gun to my right temple. I also felt a poke on my spine. 2 gunmen. I couldn't speak. Words wouldn't form no matter how hard I tried. Give me your money and keys. Now. The first guy growled and I fumbled immediately for the keys. I gave him my bank but hadn't realized the $50 was mixed in. I gave him the keys, trying my best to remain calm. Another guy came up from my left. He had poofy hair and was around the same age as the first kid. The one behind me I hadn't seen yet. The big-haired kid grabbed the pizza bag and ran off and hid. The first kid searched the company car. Luckily I had left my wallet in my personal car. I saw him grab my cell phone. That's when the panic began to set in. I had pictures on that phone that I hadn't backed up of my then 5-year-old son, who absolutely is my world. Please don't take that. I have pictures of my son who died there. That's all I have for him, please. I lied. My son is very much alive. The kid behind me spoke softly. Trust me, just listen to him, you'll get it back undamaged. I don't want to be here either. I could tell he'd been crying by how his voice sounded. A car began pulling in and the 3 boys took off to the other end of the complex in a full sprint. Before the one behind me ran, he dropped the gun in front of me. Standard issue 9mm silver and black. Safety off. Looked completely real to me. He picked it back up and ran with the others. The car that pulled in saw me. It was a woman and her kid. Panic set in as I realized they could easily come back and do way worse to me as the sky started to get dark. I collapsed. They had taken my company car keys, $72, the pizza, and my phone. The woman ran up to me and asked if I was all right. She took me into her apartment in the next building over and locked the door. I was shaking so hard I couldn't even hold her phone to talk to 911 as she set down her kid. Her boyfriend, I assume, helped me call. I spoke to the operator and told her everything. I'm colorblind and these guys were obviously wearing all black and white clothes, thank God. I had a full description of 2 of them. The poor woman who helped me was going to be late for work, but she still stayed until I was off the phone and the cops had shown up. Man, she was harsh and blunt with the operator, but I will never forget this woman's utter kindness to me and her boyfriends. Cops showed up and contacted my store and my manager brought out the spare keys for me to drive the car back to the store. After dealing with the cops, I drove back and was greeted by crying and beyond worried coworkers. All of them were terrified that I was hurt. It meant a lot to me how much they cared, but I told them I was fine. I filed the proper paperwork, and the $72 was written off as a loss to the store. Thank God, because I had worked at other stores that make you pay back the money out of pocket if you get robbed to prevent drivers from stealing. I was told by the owner to take the rest of the night off and take care of myself. He gave me a hug. He was to this day one of the best bosses I ever had. What I didn't know was I was in for a very long night. I called my best friend before I left the store from the store phone and asked where he was. We usually meet up for drinks after work. He was around the corner at a bar. So I met up with him. His dad was a District 4 cop in my city at the time, the same district that this happened in. He told me his dad had given him a heads up and he had 2 shots waiting for me to calm my nerves. After the 2 shots, we began playing pool when his dad called his phone and asked if I was with him yet. He said yeah and handed me the phone. His dad asked if I could come to the station. I was honest and told him I'd had 2 shots, so he sent out a squad car to get me since it wasn't that far away. We got to the station. They had suspects in custody. I needed to ID them. 3 boys and a driver. They had been caught less than 20 minutes after the robbery, speeding. The bolo had already gone out, and they matched the description. They had used the money to buy weed and gas, and had taken off. They had at least 15 stolen cell phones on them. The order had been placed on a stolen phone. My phone was in the mix in the box. The police told me to grab my phone only, and I did. They asked me to unlock it. It had fingerprint verification, so that was easy. 9 of the 10 tries to unlock it had already been used before my phone would have completely reset. It unlocked. I told the police every detail yet again. Although my parental instincts kicked in. I told them the guy behind me quite obviously was bullied into this and to show mercy. He was the one with the white shirt. The police went wide-eyed and told me he was the one talking. The other 3 denied involvement. That's when I found out about the 4th guy, the driver. We found out later he was completely unaware of the robbery and was just picking up his friends. He was never charged. The boy who was behind me and the one who grabbed the pizza were 15 and 16 and got 6 months of house arrest. The only reason the one behind me got off easy despite having the gun to my back was because I asked them to go easy on him because he was a good kid who didn't want to be there. And he was the only one confessing. Makes sense since he had even said the other guy wouldn't have the phone for long. He was planning on going to the cops had they not been caught. But the other guy, the first kid who put the gun to my temple, it was his 18th birthday. He got the book thrown at him. In the courtroom, he made fun of me and was laughing at me. Seeing him made me panic. The judge scolded him for his behavior and he just grinned and glared at me with a Joker-like grin. All I could see was pure evil. This kid will commit more crimes. I have no doubt he will eventually end someone's life. You can see how cold he is just by looking in his eyes. He's an evil incarnate. I grew up in a town full of murders and abusers. I had never seen this kind of evil in my life. And I never want to see it again. I asked to have my name stricken from the records, and asked to remain anonymous in case he ever got out. I'm so glad I did. Because today I got a letter from the state. He's being released in February. The court only had my old address, my parents' house, and my mom didn't think the letter was important. I missed the deadline to protest his release for probation. The plea deal was 8 years, it's only been 4. He's getting out early due to overcrowding. Not good behavior, overcrowding. This coming February. And I'm ready if he finds me. My wife, my parents, everyone I know knows his face and name. If he tries anything, we are all ready. But for his sake, let's not meet. To the woman and her family who helped me, I was a woman then. I'm trans. If you see this, please know my undying gratitude for you all. It was inconvenient for you and yet you still were late to work to help me and I cannot thank you enough. I bought Christmas presents for your daughter but when I went to the landlord there to find you had moved. I didn't want to be a creep and stalk your new place. But I'm glad you got out of that bad neighborhood and I hope your beautiful baby girl is doing well too. I would gladly meet you again to give you the proper thanks you deserve. From the Domino's driver in Southwest Ohio. Edit. He's already got a warrant out for new crimes. I don't know the details but I know there was another victim based on the type of crimes committed. 3 of them. He got let out February 2nd, the warrants are from February 22nd. I've been watching his Facebook since everything was public, just making sure he was staying away from my family. I hadn't checked it since mid-February, so I just checked it. I noticed he stopped posting. Since he was posting everything including asking for smoke and when he was going to be on Facebook, that was unusual, so I checked the records page. More violent crimes have been committed and he's more than likely on the run. From his Facebook, it looked like he was turning around. Guess not. I feel horrible. I know I tried my hardest to make sure he stayed in. Victim services did not care to listen basically. Now he's hurt someone else. I feel horrible for the new victim. And I know it's not, but I can't help but feel like I'm partially guilty for this. I'll keep updating as this develops. As of right now, he's on the run. Another edit, March 22, 2023. He is back in prison as of March 8 for 5 charges. If victim services has ever failed, it's now. I can't help but feel guilty and horrible, like I could have done more. He is being charged with violent crimes against individuals, possession of a weapon under disability F4, so probation violation I guess, and homicide. Someone died by his hand. After I fought as much as I could to try to keep him locked up. I know this isn't my fault, yet I can't stop the guilt. Hopefully this won't happen to anyone else by his hand. As of this point, it'll be years before we get a verdict, more than likely, so this may be the final update. Thank you all so much for your support. Stay safe out there, friends. It's a crazy world. Story 4. The Raincoat Man. Hey there, a friend of mine recommended that I should join Reddit and tell this story here. What I am about to describe will sound like a Chiapas cliché movie script. But this did indeed happen. Even at home, barely anybody believes me without confirmation from the other parties involved. Buckle up, it's a long haul. Autumn 2019 in British Columbia, Canada. I am from Germany, but spent half a year in Canada as part of my bachelor's degree. I barely got back before COVID hit. I was 22 years old at the time, and the other people involved were about the same age. Another foreign student and I befriended this local Canadian student. We all had the same interests and humor, and the dude became a very good friend of ours. He told us all about the local area, and we spent a week in the summer with him and his father at their very remote, remember this, cabin near some woods. They taught us how to handle guns there and let us shoot a lot. Ammo is expensive AF. Then fall came and we had a lot of free time due to being finished with all our papers. So our buddy proposed that we spend a few days at his dad's cabin, this time without his father. We went, hell yeah, because we could load up on booze and weed and have a great time there. Just living life. 3 close dudes in the woods gaming and getting wasted. Sounds great, right? After loading up on all the supplies, the first 3 days were very calm. On the first day, just like the last time I was there, I barely slept and was generally tense. This is because I am a naturally very paranoid guy, and I often go into alert mode in situations which are often mocked by my friends. In this case, what freaked me out the most was the fact that we were far away from civilization. And you never understand how quiet your surroundings can be until you spend some time in a remote area like this. Which led to me often just standing in the dark at night, listening to the surroundings of the cabin. But after the first few days I got less paranoid. After all, I was with friends, was constantly high, and we were quite armed and dangerous, probably most dangerous to ourselves though. Day 4 came. We spent the day, attempting to hunt in the woods. Mostly just chilling under trees with a beer and rifle in hand. But in the evening it started to rain heavily. After an hour we were starting to see lightning in the distance, with quite a bit of time passing between lightning and thunder, which meant the thunderstorm itself was still some time away. So we aborted our incompetent hunting attempts and started trekking back to the cabin. It took us about an hour to reach it, due to it already being very dark and the rain creating unsafe footing. For context, you should know that once you spend a few days in the wilderness and haven't seen a soul other than your friends for days, you can become quite careless about your surroundings. I think you can imagine why I am telling you that last part. So we entered the cabin. At that time the thunderstorm was raging full on. We put away our gear and changed clothes. Except for our guns. Yeah, I know, drugs and guns are a horrible combination and I wouldn't mix that shit nowadays, but we were drilled quite well by our Canadian friend's dad regarding trigger discipline, safety, etc. And man, I really miss spooning a rifle while sleeping. We cozied down in the living room at a table, started a YouTube video and began playing cards. Barely 20 minutes passed since we returned. And at the time, we didn't bother closing the curtains in the living room because thunderstorms are baller AF. So imagine that we were 3 guys, sitting around a table, occasionally in awe at the weather outside while playing cards. In such a remote place, it is extremely dark outside. Without a full moon and clear skies, it is pitch black. The only lamps we have are old-ass vintage-looking and dimmer than my phone's screen. What comes next is how my non-local friend has described what he saw. While sipping from his beer, another lightning went off. He spit it out instantly after the lightning came and screamed loudly and stood up. No words, just the sound of panic. My Canadian friend and I were instantly perplexed and looked at him. There is somebody outside. He started rambling about how in that split second the lightning illuminated the outside of the cabin. He saw a person standing a bit of distance away from the cabin, looking directly at us. Now this is what I meant when I said a cliché horror story. And barely anybody believes me at first. But this did happen. My non-local friend is obviously in full panic. His face looks anxious. This communicated to our Canadian buddy and me that this guy wasn't just messing with us. He did see somebody outside. I grabbed my rifle and pulled the bolt to rack a round into the chamber. I feel that warm sensation running down the spine of my body, releasing adrenaline. I tried to stay far away from the window, stare into the darkness outside, but I couldn't see anything. While our Canadian friend rushed into his room to grab his pistol, I started panicking even more because I realized we didn't lock the door. Why would we? We haven't seen anyone in days and are in the middle of wilderness. So I ran to the door and locked it. Our friend returns with his pistol, which he grabbed because there was a flashlight attached to it. He carefully approached the window, then changed his pace from sneaky to fast and pushed the window open with one hand, while the other hand was aiming the handgun outside. I wish I was any good at drawing, because what we saw next when our friend turned on the flashlight was the most terrifying image I have ever seen. It is burned into my mind. The fact that I cannot share that image with other people has been bugging me for 3 years now. The light turns on. What we saw in that moment was a man, tall and slim, dressed in all black, with a hooded raincoat which he had pulled over his head, almost covering his eyes. But not far away from the cabin, just a few steps away from the window. Not standing as our friend yelled earlier, but crouching. Looking directly at us with clenched eyes and a fucking terrifying little smirk on one side of his mouth. Another lightning flashes, and for that moment we were all frozen. The image of what we saw must have shocked the other guys as much as it did me, because nobody said anything for a few seconds. There is a hard-to-explain dreadful feeling about seeing something like this. In a storm, in the middle of nowhere, a person dressed in a black raincoat is suddenly crouching so close to you. And facing you. Our Canadian buddy was aiming his pistol plus attached flashlight at the also frozen crouched smirking man and just yelled out, with a slight stutter and a higher-pitched voice than I've ever heard from him. "G, get the fuck away from us, or we will shoot." I guess at that moment after his eyes adjusted, the raincoat man realized that this was not just a flashlight, but a gun. And I was standing next to my friend with a hunting rifle in my arm. Raincoat man's slight smirk changed to something where I am unsure if it was shock or rage. All this was happening in less than a minute. While my friend kept on yelling, and I was just frozen, the raincoat figure turned by about 90 degrees towards the nearest tree line, and went from crouch to full sprint quickly. He ran away to the right side of our window. 2 of us poked their head out of the window to see where exactly he was going, but with the heavy rainfall and darkness we could barely make out anything in the distance of that tree line. After a few minutes of just looking at each other in disbelief, we decided to pop off a few rounds outside the window, to prove that we were for real, and to cope. When the shock wore off, we decided to call the police. They asked a lot of questions on the phone to describe the location of the cabin and a description of the man who just almost crept up on us, totally unsuspecting and only revealed due to lightning and luck. Due to us being in such a remote area, the cops told us it'd take at least 1 or 2 hours for somebody to come out. They asked because of the weather and time, if it'd be alright if they send somebody out tomorrow to talk to us about all the details. Given how the man saw that we were armed, he probably wouldn't come back again. We agreed. We discussed just jumping in the truck and leaving right now. But us dumbasses were too lazy to refuel the truck. The idea of doing this now, in the dark and in that heavy rain, was just too frightening. I kept thinking about this guy lurking in the darkness and picking us off one by one. We spend the night sleeping in shifts. One person was awake and standing guard, the others at least attempted to sleep. When my turn came, the rain had died down. I turned off all the lights, opened a window, and just sat there in the darkness, trying to listen for any sound I could hear, and looking out of the windows to scan the area. Let me tell you, when you're sitting in the dark for hours in full alert mode, just trying to sit still, listen and look around, you have a lot of time to think and reiterate what just happened. Close to the middle of the next day, 2 cops arrived. We had to give them a detailed report of what happened, when it happened, and had to show them in which direction the raincoat shade ran off to. They said they will organize a patrol to comb through the woods, but that might take a while because they need experienced outdoorsmen, etc. Sadly, we didn't see many details of the man's face. We couldn't tell if he was young or old, only that he was tall and clean-shaven. The chances of finding who exactly that was, and finding out what the hell he was attempting to do, were very small. Though one of the officers expressed that this whole happening was deeply worrying. We left the cabin a few hours after the police left, and the Canadian guy's dad insisted we stay at his place at least for a day until we feel safe again. He also wanted to hear every last detail and figured that the time has come to install cameras around the cabin. I don't remember this part for sure, but I believe that I heard later that Dad and his brother went back to the cabin and just sat there in the dark, waiting for the raincoat man to return. But I never heard of any results, so I guess he must have gone hunting in other areas. I never heard from the cops again. Next January I left Canada and returned home. My Canadian friend was called in for an interview a few months later. And it seemed like the police were still seriously investigating this, looking for the guy who crept up on a cabin during a thunderstorm. The image of that crouched raincoat figure, completely wet and surrounded by darkness, so close to our cabin, is burned into my mind. I will most likely never forget this. I still sometimes turn off all the lights and just look out the windows in silence, trying to listen for sounds. Even though I am on the other side of the world now. We have speculated a lot about what that was. The winning theory is that this guy most certainly had sinister intentions. This did not look like just an attempt at burglary. Remember, we had dim lights on. You could see that there was somebody inside the cabin. This guy was creeping towards us in a raincoat during a thunderstorm. When my friend yelled out that he saw somebody, this guy went from walking/standing to crouching. And he went closer towards the window. I suspect the raincoat man wanted to check what kind of victim was on the menu. And I don't really want to imagine what he had in store if there were 2 unarmed girls there, in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. We didn't see any headlights passing the clearing the cabin was on. The guy also had no backpack or something. Just the raincoat and black weather-appropriate clothing. I'd bet my soul that this guy was a man on a mission, who knew exactly what he was doing and what he was well prepared for. While writing this post, I also started thinking about the logistics of it all. The guy must have a camp or at least a car hidden somewhere in those woods. You can't sustain yourself out there otherwise. I also got the feeling that he either came upon the cabin during the storm itself, or that he spotted us in the woods during the hunting we did before. We moved slowly, while also not being shy with waving our lights around. And in total pitch darkness wilderness, a proper flashlight must have been as easy to spot as the beacons of Gondor. So he might have tracked us through the woods until we reached the cabin. If anybody has heard about similar things happening in the area of British Columbia near Vancouver, please let me know. That mystery has a grip on me for the rest of my life. Sometimes I still dream of this raincoat figure creeping closer towards me with each flash of lightning. Story 5. Avoiding abduction. Okay, so I will preface this by saying that these events happened exactly 20 years ago, pretty much to the day. I will also mention that this could come across as anticlimactic, as it does not end with a dead body or an imprisonment. It is, however, true and accurate as I remember it. Sorry if this comes across as rambling at times. So it was not long before my 9th birthday. I was a shy, introverted kid who only had a few friends, therefore I was eager to impress them. A few friends are better than none, right? This story involves my closest friend at the time, whose name was Damon. Being so shy, I would never turn up to any parties or social events. I just couldn't face it. But it worried me that this would eventually cause me to lose my few friendships. You can imagine my horror when my dad picked me up for the school gates and Damon's mother picked him up at the same time and asked me on the spot, "Damon and his brother are going to, insert name of caravan park, this weekend, would you like to come?" For those unfamiliar, a caravan holiday, in the UK, is just a cheap couple of days in a huge field full of trailers with tacky nearby entertainment and amusements. On the spot and terrified of being rude, I accepted and came Friday evening. I sat in the car in the back in between Damon and his little brother Lucas, who was 2 years younger than us. It was only a short car ride, but all this felt so uncomfortable and unfamiliar to me. Floating through dark backstreets I hadn't seen before as wind and rain lashed the windshield while the wipers did all they could to keep up. When we arrived it was already late. We watched some crap on TV and went to bed. I had one of those brick Nokia phones that you could play Snake on that I promised I would text my dad on to let him know I was okay, which I did. The strong gale swayed the caravan that night as I fell into an uneasy sleep. Next day, we hit the shops to spend our pocket money, and then in the afternoon we went to entertainment with Damon and Lucas' parents. It was just awful live acting with clowns and such things. I may have been 8, but I wasn't a baby. So then later on at around 8 p.m. the adult entertainment comes on, a comedian of some sort, and me and Damon and Lucas are absolutely bored stiff. Me and Damon decided we just want to head back to the caravan, watch some South Park and look at our cool new stuff we bought earlier. I saw Damon ask his parents, who are happily drinking away and chatting to other parents, and as a child it seemed, swapping life stories. Eventually they gave Damon the keys to the caravan, which was about 5 minutes walk away, but instructed us to take Lucas also. We took the keys and headed out. We walked for about 2 minutes in the cold and dark, mindlessly chatting about our eyeball rings we bought earlier at the gift shop and saying how they automatically give you a super hard punch. Just stupid 8-year-old chat. When we noticed that in between 2 caravans, there is a white van, I know, typical, with its back doors wide open. I thought nothing of it. Maybe someone had just got here and was unloading his stuff. Wrong. As we walk by the van, a guy emerges from the blackness and approaches us very slowly. This was not a normal walk. I remember it being like how you would walk in the dark, being careful not to stand on anything. Strangely, we still weren't too worried until he actually spoke. He stared at us for a few seconds, but didn't smile or physically acknowledge us. Then he blurts out an enthusiastic, "All right, boys? Can one of you strong lats help me shift this heavy box into the back of my van? I've hurt my back." Now, back then, stranger danger wasn't as commonly spoken about as it is today. But I absolutely knew this was not right. His walk, his voice, his eyes. I had a million thoughts in about 10 seconds. What can I do? Call my dad? He's miles away. Scream help? There's no one in these caravans. They are all at entertainment. Fight him? You're it. I thought things couldn't get any worse. I was wrong. As me and Damon stood frozen, his younger brother naively says, "Yeah, okay, I'm strong," and starts marching towards this guy who was only about 15 feet away from us. I'll never forget his horrid face when he saw Lucas walking towards him. It was like a spider that had caught a fly. I heard Damon let out a broken screech, "Lucas, no." It is at this point I am ashamed to say that I continued walking the way we were originally meant to. And fast. I couldn't watch this. What if he murdered Lucas in front of me? What if he came and grabbed me? The only thing I could think to do was walk quickly and try to find someone, anyone who could help. About 10 seconds later, Damon and Lucas came sprinting up behind me and shouted, "Run," and round we did. Oh, how we ran. I don't know how Damon got Lucas away. I don't know if the man chased us. I don't know what he wanted with us, but I have a few ideas. As we approach the caravan, I begin to feel semi-rational again. As we catch our breath, I can remember saying to Damon, "Why couldn't we just run back to the entertainment area to get your parents?" And Damon replied, "What?" and ran towards him. It was a good point, but I was too busy trying not to cry to say anything else. As Damon fumbled around with his keys at the caravan door, for some reason or another the keys just did not work, so we tried all of them. Turning them in all directions, pushing and pulling and hoping and praying. I can clearly picture in my mind being stood there on that dark night with Damon and Lucas. The key halfway hanging out of the lock. The fear and the confusion. But most of all I remember Damon looking straight at me after turning bright red with puffy eyes and bursting into tears. Because he had realized what I would then realize seconds later. We had to go back. Strangely, Lucas was the only one not crying. I think he was too young to understand the danger we were truly in. After deciding that we were in just as much danger standing there as we would be going back, we headed back towards Damon's parents. I have never ran that fast in the 20 years since then, and I dare say Damon would say the same. About halfway there, we hear the most disgusting primal wail you can imagine. It was about 5 seconds long and it sounded like a mixture of anger and pain. We never stopped, just made brief eye contact and kept going. Has the man killed someone? Or was this man screaming because he knew we had got away? We would never know. We burst through the entertainment area doors and sprinted towards Damon's parents, who were blissfully unaware of the horrors that had just occurred. I remember his mother staring at us wide-eyed with her mouth open, and we burst into floods of tears. Half because of the trauma and half because of the relief. I felt so warm and safe. We tried to explain in babble and gibberish, but I'm not sure we got our point across. The next morning I asked to go straight home. I don't truly understand what happened that night. I don't know who he was, what he wanted, or why he screamed, but like I said, I have my theories. But no one was killed that night in that caravan park, and nobody else was around to scream. Story 6. That night I slept at a friend's house. Before the story, please forgive me if I make any English mistakes. I'm French, trying my best. When I was in high school, I was like 16, I had a friend, Lisa, and a second friend, Zoe. Lisa had a lot of money, and her huge house was located right next to our high school. So every time we had a break or anything, the three of us would go there, and we also would have a lot of sleepovers at her house. It was this huge rich people's house, so it was awesome to stay there. So one day, we decided to stay the night there. The three of us plus Lisa's little sister, Anna, their mother was gone for the night. We decided to put on some PJs and watch scary movies for hours. Anna went to bed before us three, and we just stayed in the living room watching TV. At one point, the alarm goes on. It happens sometimes, so Lisa just goes turn it off and that was it. But then, like 10 minutes later, the alarm goes on again, and it scares us, because it's not supposed to. Technically, the alarm was made to ring only when humans come by, because the house was located in the middle of the forest, so we all knew that sometimes animals would come by the house, happened before, so when the alarm was installed, it was calibrated for humans only. And it was the second time it rang. We started to get a little bit scared, so we went upstairs, opened the windows to look at the garden all around the house, and nothing. We even went on the balcony in the middle of the night, nothing. I was alone on the balcony at some point, and the alarm went on again and the automatic lights around the swimming pool turned on. That meant something was around the pool, and I was just above it. I got so scared I got on my knees and stayed there until my friend deactivated the alarm and the lights, and I ran inside the house. At this point, we were really scared, and started thinking about what it could be. If it has to be any human, all our lights were on, so they knew where we were. We turned all the lights off, and all four of us went hiding downstairs in the kitchen, without our phones. I don't even know why not even one of us thought about taking at least one phone. So we were there, lights off, scared in a huge house, with windows everywhere we could look. The alarm went berserk again, Anna screamed. Lisa took her with her, reassuring her while walking to shut the alarm off, like turn it off once and for all. So I was in the kitchen with Zoe only, and we were just looking all around us. The alarm was upstairs, so the two girls were far from us. At some point we heard footsteps right beside us, like right on the other side of the wall, in the garden. It was fast, not scared, just fast, like that person knew where they were going. So we just freezed, waiting in the dark, and jumped when someone, it was obvious, walked by the door/window right in front of us. We think it was a he, had a light, but it was another light that allowed us to see his silhouette. So they were at least two, running around the house for about at least 20-30 minutes. Detail, but this door was, like I said, a window door, but there were Venetian blinds on it. They were not closed, of course. We were still not moving, and the girls upstairs were so scared that they stayed there, at least it's what they told us. Suddenly, one voice, then a second one. I was unable to understand anything, but I heard it, and Zoe and I were blinded by a sudden light right at our faces. We were literally not able to move, scream, talk. Not anything we could have done was possible, we were just frozen in fear. The light stayed there, someone was seeing us through the blinds, someone was watching us being scared and was just staying there. Suddenly we heard a hard sound on the front door, which was closed. Zoe didn't move at all, but I don't know what took me. It just woke me up and I crawled to the door in front of me, back door, closed the blinds and just hold the door in place in case the guy on the other side tried to force it. Honestly, I'm small and thin, my little body was useless there, but I did it anyway. The one at the front door was still trying to enter, Zoe still not moving, the two girls upstairs doing what I don't know what, and the one just a glass window away from me started hitting it, trying to force it. It was closed, but I just grabbed the handle and hung in there for a while. He was just sitting and trying to open the door. All this lasted hours in my head, but I believe it was only a few seconds. At one point, the hits at the front door stopped. A few seconds later, the other one in front of me stopped as well. Then the lights just moved fast everywhere, the alarm did nothing, so it was disabled as wanted, and there was nothing. Zoe and I just slept in the kitchen, and the two sisters upstairs, nothing happened at all, it was over. The next day, Lisa and Anna's mom came back home, we told her everything, got a bit yelled at because we didn't call the cops. I took it wrong at that time, but I understand now why she got upset. She called the cops, who went to see the house and just discovered footsteps all around the house, some muddy footprint or mark on the front door. They said they must have kicked the door, and that was it. They told us it must have been some guys who were just doing some recognition, you know, when they just walk around the houses to see how to rob it. It was common in this area. There were a lot of really big and beautiful houses filled with expensive things. The only thing I will never be able to explain is why they started being so aggressive. Originally, they were just walking around the house, but I think that if they were trying to see something or just look things up, they would have left when they realized we were inside, or at least left when that guy saw us in the kitchen. Well, they didn't. The moment they saw us in the kitchen, they didn't see the two sisters. They started being aggressive and trying to force the doors to enter the house where we were. I don't know if they really wanted to rob the house. I will never, and honestly, I don't want to know. I didn't spend any more nights at this house. I got so scared they would come back again I couldn't sleep there. Lisa got a bit mad like she didn't understand, but from what she told Zoe and I, she didn't see them. She just stayed upstairs with her sister. I understand it, but I wasn't able to stand the fact that she couldn't understand how scared I was as well. Story 7. The Man Who Followed Me Home. I grew up in a rural part of northern England, but moved to London 6 years ago to live with my partner, as she had got a job there. I didn't drive at the time, so I would take the bus to and from work and walk a short way back to our flat. The walk from the bus stop to home never took longer than 10 minutes, and it was through a well-lit area, lined with shops and restaurants. Up until this incident, I never really had any issues. It was November, so it was pretty much dark by the time I left work at 6 p.m. One Friday night, after I had only been living in London for a couple of months, one of my work colleagues asked if I wanted to go for a drink with her after work. I'm not a big drinker, but it was a Friday night, my partner was working late, and since I was fairly new in town and desperate to make friends, I agreed to go along for a couple. I took the bus with her straight from work to a pub close to her home. She lived basically the next suburb over from me, so it was fairly close, but not an area I was particularly familiar with. I had 2 or 3 drinks, so I was a little tipsy, but not drunk, not that it should matter. I decided to leave at around 10 p.m. so as not to be traveling home too late at night, particularly along a route I didn't know. I said my goodbyes and left my colleague and her friends at the pub. On my way out, I stopped to put my empty glass down on the bar. As I did so, I looked down the bar and made brief eye contact with a man sitting a little further down. I gave a passing smile, as you might do when you make accidental eye contact with a stranger, and then continued on my way out of the pub. The bus stop was maybe 200 yards down and across the street from the pub. You could see it from the entrance. I was about halfway to the stop when I got that prickling feeling on the back of my neck. Like you get when someone is staring at you through a window or across a busy street. I turned to look behind me quickly, and it didn't take me long to figure out what was giving me that feeling. It was the man I had glimpsed back at the pub, walking about 20 paces behind me, watching me carefully. I was a little weirded out, but I reasoned with myself that it was a Friday night in London. There were a lot of people on the street. People heading home, people on nights out, people just milling around. So I put it down as perfectly innocent and just kept walking, trying hard not to look back. I reached the stop and fortunately the bus was only a few minutes away. The man reached the stop only moments later and proceeded to hover a few feet away from me. I was on my phone and trying not to look at him, but I could feel his eyes on me. I looked up and caught him staring at me, expecting him to look away awkwardly as soon as he realized he had been caught looking, but he didn't, he just kept on staring. This was the first time I had got a proper look at him. He was a young man, couldn't have been much older than myself. I was in my early 20s at the time, quite slender and tall, with short shaved hair. He would have been good looking if not for the intensity of his staring. I must have been looking at him for longer than I thought because he then gave me a sly wink and I quickly looked away. It wasn't a nice kind of wink, the kind that might be considered cute or endearing. No, this was an unsmiling, almost threatening kind of wink. The kind that told me he was watching me, that he knew I knew that he was watching me, and that he didn't care. My bus eventually rolled up and I got on, quietly hoping that he wasn't getting the same bus as me. I wasn't so afraid at this point, just uneasy. It isn't nice being intensely stared at by anyone, much less a complete stranger, but I was still under the assumption at this point that it was just some creepy dude who happened to be at the same bus stop as me, nothing more than that. I sat down on the lower deck, close to the driver, and my heart sank a little to see the man get on just behind me. Fortunately, there was already someone sitting in the seat next to mine, so he had to sit across the aisle. But still he stared at me, now with a strange little smirk on his lips that made me feel even more uncomfortable. I did my best to pretend that I simply hadn't noticed him, only allowing myself the occasional glance up at him to see if he was still watching me. From what I could tell, he didn't look away once. With each passing minute I was becoming more and more afraid, despite my best efforts to convince myself that this was all just an innocent misunderstanding on my part. At every stop I was praying for him to get off, for this to be his stop so I could relax and prove to myself I was just being paranoid. As the stops passed, I knew I was going to have to get off the bus soon, and I was fairly sure at this point that he was going to follow me. We were coming close to my usual stop when the bus took an unexpected turn onto a housing estate. I was so distracted by this guy staring at me and potentially following me, I had completely forgotten this was a different bus route to my usual one. In a normal situation, this would not have bothered me. But in my current situation, it was the absolute worst possible thing that could have happened. I was no longer on the well-lit street full of shops in an area I knew quite well. Now I was on a dark, quiet, completely unfamiliar estate. No people around, just rows of silent houses with the lights off. I realized I didn't actually know the route home from here either. I knew I had to be close, but having only lived in the area for a couple of months, I hadn't had the chance to get to grips with all the shortcuts yet. I waited until the very last minute to ring the bell for the next stop and I jumped off very quickly. It was a long shot, but I hoped that the weird guy would be caught off guard and not get the chance to follow me. Suffice to say, that plan didn't work. In hindsight, I should have just stayed on the bus until it reaches the terminal and then maybe reported my concern to the driver. But at the time, I was a bit tipsy and scared and just wanted to go home. It was a dumb, spur-of-the-moment decision made out of panic. He hopped casually off the bus after me, and at this point there was absolutely no doubt in my mind that he was following me. I decided to stay at the bus stop and to call anyone to come and help me. But all my friends and family that I would usually call in a bad situation lived back home, hundreds of miles away. My partner was working nights and wasn't even allowed to have her phone on her person. I tried calling the girl who I had been out to the pub with to see if I could maybe double back to hers and stay at her house for the night. She wasn't answering her phone. I could call the police? But what if it turned out he wasn't following me? What if he realized I had called the police and attacked me? All the time I was desperately trying to get in touch with someone who might be able to help me in my current predicament. This guy was leaning casually against the bus stop, hands in pockets, just watching me. Several minutes passed and I still had no better plan in mind than to just stay where I was. I certainly didn't want this guy knowing where I lived. These thoughts were all rushing through my mind at about 100 miles per hour and I damn near crapped myself when suddenly he said, "What's your name?" I could do nothing but stare at him in surprise for a second or two, then I forced myself to reply, Amy. I lied. I figured I didn't want to piss him off at all, so I just answered with whatever name came into my head first. That horrible little smirk slid across his lips again. He was still leaning against the stop. Give me your number, Amy, he said, and he took out his phone. Let's be friends. This didn't sound like a request. There was a sharpness to his voice which made me shudder. No, thank you, I replied. His face dropped, the smirk disappeared, then reappeared as he seemed to compose himself. Where do you live? I'll walk with you, he said, a little more assertively this time. I'm okay, I'm staying at a friend's. He's actually coming to get me right now to take me back to his place. I lied again, desperate to come up with anything that would make him go away. He paused for a while, and I could practically hear the cogs turning as he tried to figure out whether I was lying. He watched me silently for a long moment, studying my face with a cold calculation. He must have decided that I was lying to him because he suddenly took a step towards me, and through slightly gritted teeth, as if I was really trying his patience, he repeated, "Give me your number." Startled at the sudden move towards me, I took several steps back. He continued to approach me. I panicked, turned, and tried to walk away from him, but he reached out and grabbed me by the wrist. I spun back round to face him, and now the only look on his face was one of complete anger. There's no need to be such a about this, he hissed. Fear had surged through me when he grabbed my arm, and his touch seemed to burn my skin like an open flame. It was repulsive, so much so that my body had an almost convulsive reaction to being touched by him. I managed to twist my arm out of his grip, and I heard a voice in the back of my mind telling me, "You need to get away right now. Run." And I did run. I turned and ran as fast as my legs would carry me back the way the bus had brought me. I didn't even fully know where I was going, but I knew I had to get myself as far away from this person as possible. I made the mistake of looking over my shoulder once to see him now running after me, only a few feet behind. His eyes were wide and angry. The fear and adrenaline kept me going, longer and faster than I'd probably ever run before. Just as I reached the end of the road, I saw what I needed, and I instantly burst into tears of relief. 2 police officers were walking towards me along the other side of the street. I made a beeline for them, now also yelling for help. By the time I reached them, I was a sobbing, breathless mess. I could hardly speak to tell them what had happened. I managed to splutter a few choice words, and turned to point towards my pursuer. By now he was almost back at the other end of the street. He had simply turned around, and walked calmly back towards the bus stop like he was out for a nice evening stroll. I was worried the police officers were just going to think I was some crazy drunk girl. But they could see I was clearly very shaken, and one of them ran off after the guy. The man had, by now, disappeared around the corner at the other end of the street, followed shortly after by the police officer, and that was the last I saw of him. The officer who went after the guy radioed his partner a few minutes later to say he had lost him once they reached the main street, but he would keep looking. The officer who had stayed with me took a description from me, and I made a report about what had happened. I told the officer I didn't fully know my way home from where I was, so she walked with me back to my front door. I was shaking the whole way. When I got into my room, I lay in bed crying until I fell asleep. I never heard anything else about it after that. There is no doubt in my mind that if he had caught me that night, he would have harmed me. I believe he was out looking for someone to target. I believe he clocked me the moment we made eye contact in the pub. If given the chance, he would have followed me all the way back to my front door in the hope that I would, at some point, be alone in a secluded enough area for him to grab me. Everything about his demeanor and the way he spoke to me just screamed that this was a man who was just predatory. And the way he was able to go from being furiously angry enough to chase me down the street, to immediately regaining his composure and walking away like nothing had happened in order to evade being caught, is just absolutely terrifying. I'll remember his face for a very long time, and I would not be surprised if it comes up on the news at some point in the future. So, creepy stranger who thinks it is acceptable to do this kind of thing, let's not meet again.